So I got so caught up in that I forgot to put my mic on. Well, hey, I want to welcome you this morning. My name is Brett. I'm the lead pastor here at New Life Church, and I need to echo what Steve said. Man, it is so good to be here to worship with you guys. Man, I had the opportunity. There's a running theme this morning of getting away. I think half the state of Minnesota was not in Minnesota last week. Majority of people were somewhere warm. I heard Arizona, Florida, California, all sorts of different places. And yet last week happened to be one of the nicest weeks Minnesota's had in a while, right? Came back and the landscape has completely changed. The mountains are gone. It's sad. Like, I don't have to kind of look around when I'm pulling out of my driveway or around a corner anymore because the mountains have disappeared. Which means it's a little more flat than it was before, which is a bummer. But it is good to be back, good to be here with you guys and to worship, which is what we come on a Sunday morning to do. And I don't know about you, but wherever it is that you worship, hopefully it's a time where you can get away with God. I had a chance this week to be on a beach. It was a vacation that my family has planned for a number of years now and kind of highlighted this time in our kids' lives because we went to this place called Disney. Anybody ever heard of it? Yeah, it's awful. Don't go. It's terrible. I don't know why they build it up. You stand in line for everything. I mean, everything. You stand in line for the rides. There's now a cool app, though, that tells you you're going to stand in line for this long. It will be miserable. No joke. Some of the lines were 150 minutes to ride a 3-minute ride. Less than a minute and a half, 90 seconds. I don't even know what it was. But you're trying to navigate this whole thing. You're like, oh, and all you can do is pray, Lord, please make it not so miserable. You stand in line for the bathroom. You stand in line for food. You stand in line for the rides. You're then in line in traffic because there's stoplights every 3 seconds. It's like stop, 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 stop. And then everything's right there. All the hotels, all the resorts, everything. It's miserable. Don't go. I was fed a lie. To be a good father, you got to go to Disney. Nope. Don't do it. You know what? I checked that box. Over, done. Never going to do it again. But there were a lot of highlights, right? There were a lot of fun moments. There were a lot of memories that were made. And one of them was standing on the beach. Had the opportunity to stand on the beach and just kind of see the vastness and understand who God is. And it was really neat. One of those moments, we saw a pod of dolphins that had circled a school of fish, like 15 yards off the beach. And just to stand there and see the wonder of nature and see God at work was absolutely incredible. And there were moments all the way throughout the trip where God reminded me of who he is and how we function in this world and what his desire for us. And one of those ways was through driving our rental car. Anybody had a rental car before? There's a lot of theories about how you should drive a rental car. One of them is drive it like you stole it. You ever heard that? Yes, right? It's not yours. Take advantage of it. So we had a car that had a little bit of muscle, and so at least more than my Chevy Cruze, which isn't saying much. But I tried everything I could, everything within me. I'm like, I'm going to drive this like I stole it. We're going to have some fun with this. You know, you're sitting at a red light, and you're like, what can this thing do? You know, you're going to pull out a little bit quicker than you would have in your car. You know, their gap's probably a little bit shorter. You're like, come on, let's go. And I hated it. I just couldn't do it. For me, driving a rental car is stressful. You just get in it and you're like, I hope I don't crash. You know, the kids get in and you're like, don't make a mess. Don't touch anything. Don't scratch the door. You know, we have a van, and so the minivan, the doors like open out, you know, and here's a car, the doors open this way. I don't know if my kids are used to doors opening this way. Don't throw them open. Be careful of the wind. Don't hit the car next to you. And the whole time I'm just like, freaking out. I wish I could drive it like it wasn't mine, but instead I was like, I got to take care of this. Which is completely different than I drive my own car, right? That's not the case at all, especially when you have kids, you know, in the rental, you're like, don't touch anything, don't eat anything. In your own car, there's like French fries everywhere. And it's dirty and gross and just kind of nasty. And yet that's not always the way my car was. At one point, I drove it like a rental. At one point, it was new and exciting to me. At one point, I was, every time I got in, nervous that I was going to do something wrong or I was going to hit something. But after a while, something changes, right? And then French fries show up everywhere, and there's dents in it. And as your kids are riding their scooters and their bikes, and they scratch the side and they bump it, and then there's the inevitable accident where, the car in front of you, you're turning right. They should have gone. There was clearly a gap for them to go, but they didn't. And you weren't paying attention because they should have gone, and you sideswipe them as you go because now there's time for you. But the car just kind of loses something, right? It loses some luster. That's the way everything new in life is. At some point, the newness fades. All that shimmers in this world fades. Whether it's a new car, whether it's something you got for Christmas, maybe it's a video game, maybe it's a Barbie doll, whatever it may be, at some point in life, it loses its luster. Same thing holds true with relationships. Even in relationships, at some point, the newness fades. And that holds true with our faith. That holds true even with our faith and our relationship with God. That at some point, the newness fades. At some point, it's not what it was before. And the beauty of the Bible is it tells us exactly how we function. One of the things that continues to remind me over and over and emphasize for me over and over and over again the truth of the Bible is that it speaks to human behavior better than anything else I've ever run into. And God knew that our human behavior was that the newness would fade and that the newness would wear off and that the excitement at some point would go away. And God warns us, don't let that happen. Don't let that happen, specifically with your faith. See, we need to treat our faith like a new car. We must treat our faith like a new car. Remember what it was like when you had a new car or whatever the new thing was, how you treated it? In this passage we're going to look at today, God tells us that. Treat it like it's new. Treat your faith, treat your relationship with me like it's new. And he gives us reminders of how to do that. So I'm going to encourage you guys to open up with me to Joshua chapter 23 this morning. Joshua 23, we're continuing our series in Joshua. We're almost done. Got a couple weeks left, but we're coming to the end of Joshua. We're going to be starting a new series going into Easter, and then continuing that coming out of Easter. But as we continue here in Joshua, we're at a place where the Israelites are now in the promised land. They've gotten settled. They're at a place where the land is new, where it's exciting. And yet God speaks to them through Joshua and says, I understand what happens to new things. And so I'm going to give you a warning to make sure that you stay true to me and that you stay excited about where you're at. And I'm going to give you some reminders of who I am so you can remember how to treat this place. And so open up with Joshua chapter 23. If you don't have a Bible, I'd love to give you one this morning. There's some hard copies on the back table back there. You can download one on any of your smart devices. We encourage people every Sunday, bring your own Bible. We don't have Bibles under the chairs on purpose because my desire is that every single one of us will have one, that will own one, and if you don't, we'll give you one. The reason we do that is that we don't want to just read it on Sunday, but our hope and desire is that every day that we can, we read it, and that God radically changes our lives through his word, which is our prayer for today. So Joshua 23, starting in verse 1. After a long time had passed, and the Lord had given Israel rest from all their enemies around them, Joshua, by then a very old man, summoned all Israel, their elders, leaders, judges, and officials, and said to them, I am very old. You yourselves have seen everything the Lord your God has done to all these nations for your sake. It was the Lord your God who fought for you. Remember how I have allotted as an inheritance for your tribes all the land of the nations that remain, the nations I conquered between the Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea in the west. The Lord your God himself will push them out for your sake. He will drive them out before you, and you will take possession of their land, as the Lord your God promised you. Be very strong Be careful to obey all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, without turning aside to the left or to the right. Do not associate with these nations that remain among you. Do not invoke the names of their gods or swear by them. You must not serve them or bow down to them, but you are to hold fast to the Lord your God as you have until now. The Lord has driven out before you great and powerful nations. To this day, no one has been able to withstand you. One of you routs 1,000 because the Lord your God fights for you just as he promised. So be very careful to love the Lord your God. But if you turn away and ally yourselves with the survivors of these nations that remain among you, and if you intermarry with them and associate with them, then you may be sure that the Lord your God will no longer drive out these nations before you. Instead, they will become snares and traps for you, whips on your backs and thorns in your eyes until you perish from this good land, which the Lord your God has given you. Now I am about to go the way of all the earth. You know with all your heart and soul that not one of all the good promises the Lord your God gave you has failed. Every promise has been fulfilled, not one has failed. But just as all the good things the Lord your God has promised you have come to you, so he will bring on you all the evil things he has threatened, until the Lord your God has destroyed you from this good land he has given you. If you violate the covenant of the Lord your God, which he commanded you, and go and serve other gods and bow down to them, the Lord's anger will burn against you, and you will quickly perish from the good land he has given you. So the Israelites are in the land. The land is new. They are excited about what has been taking place. And if you were with us last week, if you go back to the previous chapter, you'll see that they were so excited about it that they were holding it at this place of high esteem to the point where there was some miscommunication and there was almost a civil war that was started because of an interpretation of an act of a group of individuals that were not going to hold this in high esteem. They did not want this to get ruined. They did not want this to fall, like God warned here, into a place where they were going to have to recover it. They did not want to make it something that it shouldn't be. They wanted it to be exactly what it was supposed to be, right? It was new, which is exactly the way that we would act if we had something new. It's exactly the way we would treat something that we had just received, which is exciting, which is great, which you're like, yes, the Israelites are off to a good start. They're obeying what God has told them. They're moving in the right direction. They are doing what it is that they're supposed to do. And yet God knew, he could see what was coming. He understood where their hearts would go. He knew human nature, and he said, be careful, because at some point you may walk away. Because this thing that's new now won't necessarily be new forever, right? Which is just like our cars. I go back to that because as I just drove a rental car, I'm reminded of the newness of things. I haven't had a new car in a while. Maybe you have. Maybe this is fresh in your mind. Maybe you've had a new car at some point. And so if you go back and think about what that was like, it was special. Maybe it was something other than a car, but think about the thing that you at one point had that was new to you that you were really, really, really excited about. For me, at one point, it was a new car. In fact, it was 2 new cars that I happened to buy on the exact same day. I know, weird, right? Well, I needed one. I was working for Target at the time, and I had just gotten promoted, and so I knew a pay increase was coming, and I was driving a car that was about 12 years old, had 175,000 miles on it. I'd put 125,000 of those miles on it. It had no air, it had no heat, it had 33 leaks in all of the different valves and things that it had. It took 10 minutes to either shift into drive or reverse when I started it, and it needed to go away. But I didn't want it to go away. I loved this car. I absolutely loved it, so much so that because I was cheap and yet I loved the car, I didn't fix any of it, I improvised. And here's what I did. In the wintertime, for 2 years, I drove with no heat. I bought one of those heaters that you plug into the cigarette lighter. It was awesome. It was great. That thing would heat that car up like pretty intense. But it had to start underneath my jacket because it was so cold. So I'd plug it in, I'd turn it on, I'd stick it underneath my jacket. At some point then I'd zip my jacket down, and then the heat would start getting into, the rest of the car. And then I'd take it out of my jacket and I'd put it on the dashboard, and then it would heat the whole car. It was like a 15-minute process, and I had a 45-minute drive, so it was worth it, totally worth it. I mean, it was going to cost $3,800 to fix all the issues with the car. And finally, my wife is like, just get rid of it. So I took it to CarMax. CarMax said, we'll give you $1,200. I said, sold. Done. So I got $1,200 for this car, go to a dealer to find a new car, and walk onto the lot, and there it was. Saw it. It was great. It had an engine that was bigger than the one I had. It was going to be fun to drive. It was red. Get that connection? I worked for Target. The car was red. I was going to ask for khaki interior, but I thought that was a little much. Personalized license plate, no joke. I was going to put TGT MGR, Target Manager. It was going to be awesome. And so there it was. I see it. We're driving it. It's like, yep, this is the one I want. And then the guy's sitting there going, oh, your van kind of looks a little older. Maybe you should get a new van. How many miles are on your van? I'm like, oh, like 97,000 miles. He's like, once you hit that 100,000 mile mark, the trade-in value plummets. If you're going to do it now. I'm like, well, what are you going to offer me? What kind of deal? We got this van with this stuff, remote start. It was great, right? Automatic doors. We hadn't had those before. And he's like, we can give you this price if you get both of them today. You mean I got to do it like right now, like right today? Like I can't come back tomorrow? Nope, only today. All right, I'll do it. And so I bought 2 new cars on the same day. I will never do that again. Ever. Because what did I tell you about new cars? They scare me, right? Rental cars scare me. So now I got 2 new cars in my driveway. I don't want to drive either of them. I don't want to ruin it. I don't want to get in an accident. I don't want my kids in it. Like, I don't want any of that. Because that's what takes that next level, right? I think I could take care of my own car pretty well, but then you throw kids into the mix and all of a sudden things change. So we have this brand new van for like 2 weeks, right? Literally only a couple weeks. My daughter, who just turned 10 yesterday, was 2 at the time. And somehow my 2-year-old got into the garage, into the van with a black Sharpie. Did I mention the interior was light gray? She gets in the back seat, draws all over the seats, all over the side of the car, all over the speaker. And at 2 years old, the ability to cover as much ground as she did was impressive. I mean, she got a lot done in a short period of time before we realized, where'd she go? Why is she in the garage? What's she doing in the car? Ah! In chapter 22, they're upset at what some of the others did. They start a civil war almost. I was ready to start a civil war in my garage. You're out. Get out. I don't want you part of my family anymore. Leave. How did you? Because it was new. It was exciting. I needed to hold it in high esteem, so much so that I'm willing to kick my daughter out of my family at 2 because of what she just did to this new car. We called a professional detailer. Fortunately, he was willing to come to our house, and he got everything out. I don't know how, but he got everything out, which then made me want to treat it even that much more special. Don't you dare come anywhere near this. But like I said, something happens, right? I can't tell you the moment when it happened, but at some point, that car no longer was that special to me anymore. Fast forward 8 years since we've had that thing, and it's been absolutely incredible. We've loved it. We've been able to do a number of things in it. We have all sorts of memories, and yet the interior is no longer light gray, it's dark gray. And the floor mats are like a whitish black. I'm not sure where all the salt, it's gross. And when you move one of the seats, because it's got stow and go, you find junk everywhere. And today, if someone told me, hey, your daughter got in the van with a black Sharpie and drew over everything, I'd be like, cool, no big deal, who cares? Where was the shift? Where was the change? Where was the moment when it was no longer special? I can't tell you. I can't tell you. And yet God knew that each one of us is wired that way. And he knew with the Israelites that at some point this land that you were about to fight over, this thing that you were going to cause a civil war over, at some point is no longer going to be new. And you may do the things that I told you not to do, not because you're going to fight against me or you're intentionally doing it or you're a rebellious people, even though you are. But there's something that leads us this direction. It takes us away from the newness. And we have to be reminded over and over and over again, remember when, remember when, remember when. The very first thing I do when individuals come into my office, when we talk about relationships, we talk about marriage specifically, is I always ask the question, remember when it started. Go back to the beginning. Go back to the place where you would do anything for each other, where you were so in love that if there was some little thing that went wrong, you were going to fix it immediately, or if somebody got in between you, you were going to start a civil war because you guys were inseparable. And then at some point, something happened to where now you're sitting in my office screaming at each other because you hate each other, and you're not sure when that took place. See, God knew that would happen with his relationship with his people because the importance of the land wasn't just the land itself. The importance of the land was this is where they were going to dwell with God. This is where they were going to be in relationship together. This is where they were going to become one. This was the culmination of the promise that God had said, you will be my people and I will be your God. He's looking at them and he's saying, so hold it in high regard. Hold the land in high regard. Hold me in high regard. And don't go the way that I know inevitably as human beings you're gonna go. What's interesting about this passage, chapter 23, is that there is nothing new within this passage. This is God, through Joshua, reminding his people of everything he's already said in the beginning of this book. If you read Joshua from this point to here, Joshua 23 is kind of a recap of all the things that God has already said, which I think is good for us because oftentimes we come into church specifically or we come into our devotion every day and we're like, God, slam me with something new. I want to hear something new. I want to hear something I've never seen before. I want to be just wowed. And yet there are times where God goes, nope. You need to be reminded of what I've already told you. You need to remember what I've already done. You need to go back so that you can make sure that it stays new. And so there are 5 things that Joshua challenges the people in this passage to do. That God, through Joshua, reminds Israel of. First one is this. He reminds them of his fulfilled promises. That's been something, again, all the way through this chapter, or all the way through this book. God's promises are being fulfilled. God reminds them of his fulfilled promises. Verse 3, you yourselves have seen everything the Lord your God has done to all these nations for your sake. It was the Lord your God who fought for you. Remember how I've allotted as an inheritance for your tribes all the land of the nations that remain, the nations I conquered between the Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea in the west. The Lord your God himself will push them out for your sake. He will drive them out before you and will take possession of their land as the Lord your God promised you. He reminds them of his promises. My promises have been fulfilled. Remember the promises I've made for you. Second, he reminds them then of his expectations. The promises have been filled, but he reminds them, be strong. Be careful to obey all that is written in the book of the law of Moses. If you go back to chapter 1, you remember we said that. Without turning aside to the right or to the left. Do not associate with these nations that remain among you. Do not invoke the names of their gods or swear by them. You must not serve them or bow down to them, but you are to hold fast to the Lord your God as you have until now. Why is he saying this to them? Why is he reminding them of his expectations? Because he knew their human nature was to do exactly what he was saying don't do. Be careful again, as I told you in chapter 1, be careful again to obey all that is written. Do not turn to the left or to the side, to the left or to the right. Do not turn aside from this. Do not associate with things that will pull you away from me. Because inevitably, those things would. Number 3, God reminds them of his blessings. The Lord has driven out before you great and powerful nations. To this day, no one has been able to withstand you. One of you routs 1,000 because the Lord your God fights for you just as he promised. So be very careful to love the Lord your God. 4, he reminds them of his warning. But if you turn away and ally yourselves with the survivors of these nations that remain among you, and if you intermarry with them and associate with them, then you may be sure that the Lord your God will no longer drive out these nations before you. Instead, they will become snares and traps for you, whips on your backs and thorns in your eyes, until you perish from this good land which the Lord has given you. And then lastly, he reminds them of his faithfulness, both in blessing and judgment. I'm about to go the way of all the earth. You know with all your heart and soul that not one of all the good promises the Lord your God has failed. Every promise has been fulfilled. Not one has failed. But just as all the good things the Lord your God has promised you have come to you, so he will bring on you all the evil things he has threatened, until the Lord your God has destroyed you from this good land he's given you. If you violate the covenant of the Lord your God, which he commanded you, and go and serve other gods and bow down to them, the Lord's anger will burn against you, and you will quickly perish from the good land he has given you. See, God wanted them to be reminded of this so this land would stay new. That they wouldn't do what it is that generations before them had. And if you remember the history of Israel that we've kind of gone through to get to this point, they had all fallen away. The newness had faded and they had turned their back and they had wanted something different. And this generation was different. This generation was the generation that has now entered the promised land. And God is warning them saying, don't be like everybody else before you. Hold on to your faith with newness. Hold on to your faith with this allegiance to me, allegiance to God that is second to none amongst everybody else around you. Do not go after the other gods. Do not allow things to get into this that will destroy what it is that we have going on. Nothing new. Nothing new. And so as we read this, there's nothing new here either, probably for many of us that have been in church for a really long time. Except for the fact that it's good, that even though it may not be new, maybe it's new again that we're being reminded of this for the first time. Maybe it's good that we go back through this and we put ourselves in this situation, because not only is God speaking to the Israelites at that time, I believe he's speaking to all of his people through all of history with those same reminders. As we read what the Israelites in their relationship with God were susceptible to, we as individuals can know that in our relationship with God, we can potentially be susceptible to the same things. Will our faith no longer be new? We can't allow that to happen. So we need to take this as a reminder to ourselves. So first one for us, we must remember God's fulfilled promises. We must remember God's fulfilled promises. This is something that's been huge for me in this series. It's easy for me to get worried about tomorrow and forget about what happened yesterday. I'm a very future-focused individual. I'm very strategic in nature. I love looking ahead, thinking about where things could go and what could happen and how tomorrow could be better than today. And it's easy for me to forget about yesterday. And hard at times to focus on today, but very easy at times to look ahead. And so what can happen when you look ahead is you sit there going, how's this going to happen? I just don't know how this is going to take place. God, how are you going to put all these pieces together? Nope, I've actually encountered the thing, God, that is bigger than you. There's no way you can do this. And yet I'm reminded over and over and over again as he steps into the situation and says, oh, please, really? Don't you remember what it is I've done before? Don't you remember what it is that I fulfilled? Don't you remember the promises that have happened? And in my finite being, I sit there going, no, I don't remember that because I haven't thought about that in a really long time. See, God fulfills his promises. And as we study Joshua, we can see that the promises he made from the very beginning, he fulfilled over and over and over again. As you read this passage in 23, it says that multiple times, just as he promised. And then we can even look from when Jesus came to where we are today and the promises that God made thousands of years ago. If we trace church history, human history, if we trace the world as it has been created to this point now, guess what? He's fulfilled his promises over and over and over and over again. And so my future forward-thinking mind can then sit there going, okay, God, I can rest in the fact that as I go into tomorrow, you will still fulfill your promises. And for me, that's been huge, in that we must remember God fulfills his promises. Second, then, we must remember his expectations. God wants us to keep things new. He wants us to keep our relationship with him fresh. And so he warns us. He sets expectations and says, don't go do this, don't go do that. If you stray this way, if you do this, guess what's going to happen? It's not going to be good. And there's times in our lives where it's really hard to do that. It's easy to keep something new, clean and nice and neat, but when the newness fades, it's really hard to maintain something and take it back to new, right? I'm terrible at changing the oil in my car. Absolutely awful. In fact, I'm pretty sure that the light was beeping for like 2 months. And, they tell you 3,000 to 5,000 miles, but I think my manual said 6,000 to 8,000 miles. You know what that really means? You can probably go 10. No? You're not supposed to do that? So I should trust that light? Maybe I should do that? It's just a pain. I don't want to go and sit for an hour for them to change my oil. Even though there's a place right down here now, you can sit in your car while they do it. That's crazy. Man, we've gotten anyway, our society's lazy. I don't want to change my oil, but I have to. Because I know that there's a warning, there's an expectation that if I don't, something bad will happen. Same thing with our faith journey. God sets expectations and says, there are things that I'm asking you to do. Why? Because if you don't, it's not going to be good. It's hard to change your oil. It's hard to rotate your tires. I don't want to get new tires. They're expensive. And that air filter, they're always telling me to change. You don't really need to change that. I mean, there's dust everywhere. Who cares? Well, translate that into your spiritual life. What if you told God that about the things you're supposed to be doing in your walk? God, I don't need to read the Bible. I don't need to spend time in prayer. I don't need to be gathering together to worship. It's not that big of a deal, is it? Well, as I say all of that stuff with my car, many of you sitting there going, you're not doing that? What if I said it back to you in the spiritual world, and you said, yeah, well, praying's kind of like changing your oil. I don't really need to do that. Reading my Bible is kind of like new tires. I'll do it every so often. Maybe rotate once in a while. Do we have the same visceral reaction? You're not doing that? Because by not doing that, more damage will be caused by anything I do to my car. Because at some point, my car is going to go away. It's going to fade. I don't need it anymore. But my faith walk, my relationship with God, is something that will last forever. And so we must remember his expectations. We also then must remember his blessings. We live in a nation that's been blessed by God. There's no other way to put it. You can argue it if you want, but I truly believe that where we stand today in the world we live in is because it was a nation founded on biblical principles, on God's word, so that we would love people the way that Jesus did. And we've gone away from that. And yet when we look around, we've got to be reminded of that regularly. And so I try to do that with my kids. We start prayer every night by thanking God for something. God, thank you for this. Whatever it may be, as small as it may seem. There's times where my kids say things where I'm like, really? You're thanking God for that? That's dumb. I don't say that out loud. That'd be awful, right? And then translate that into little things. God, thank you so much that we were the first in line at Disney to get on Slinky Dog Dash. Whew. You just opened that door and just let us right there. It was incredible. And we only waited 40 minutes instead of 150 minutes. Praise the Lord. Should we be thanking God for stuff like that? I think so. It's a blessing from God. We must remember his blessings. We must remember his warnings. Love the Lord your God only. Only. Do not go to the other things that are out there. Love the Lord your God only, and remember his faithfulness. God is faithful to the end. in both his blessings and his judgments. In all things, God is faithful. So we must hold our faith in high esteem. We must treat our faith like a new car. Do we do that? I don't think we do. I think we live in a world that's okay as we read this passage with some of the things. There's some stuff that's creeped in. There's some dirt, some French fries lying around. There's some rust. There's some dents. There's some nicks. There's some scrapes. As I look at the faith that we have and what we're passing on to the next generation, are we passing on a new, exciting, passionate thing that we love? Or are we passing on a beat-up old vehicle? I saw a commercial a couple weeks ago that kind of made me think about this exact thing. Take a look at this video. So funny. How do you expect me to drive this? Turn the key. But as we look at the world today, we're passing down a faith that God says don't allow it to become old and stagnant and ugly and nasty. Don't allow rust to get in. Don't allow dirt to settle in. Don't let it become something that it shouldn't be. Hold it in high esteem. Because I am your God alone. I am the only thing you should go after, and yet we haven't necessarily done that to where we've allowed things in to where we're passing on a faith to this next generation, to the world around us, that they're sitting there going, beige Betty? I don't want beige Betty. That's gross. As hard as at times we hold beige Betty in this really great thing, right? We think of all the memories we had, right? That was a new car at one point. Can you believe that, by the way? Who sat in that room? Let's put this on the assembly line. It looks really cool. No. But for many of us, our faith we've had for many years, and there's some things that have creeped in, and there's memories that are there, and there's a lot of good stuff that had happened, and yet when the world looks at what we've allowed it to become, they sit there going, I don't want that. I don't want that. And I'm convicted about that because I know I drive a Chevy Cruze, and the way I treat my Chevy Cruze would probably be a lot different than the Dodge Viper I really want. Oh man, if I had a Dodge Viper, I would not treat it the way I do my Chevy Cruze. Why? I don't know. Do we do that with our relationship with God? Do we do that with the things that he has given us? The good things he has given us, the land, the relationship he has given us? Because guess what? He knew we would. And he calls us back to it over and over and over again. Don't do it. Don't allow the junk to creep in. Don't stray from my word. Keep to it. Don't go to the left. Don't go to the right. Don't go to other gods. Don't move this way. Don't move that way. Focus on me alone. Not because I want your life to be miserable. No, I want it to be awesome. I want it to be new. I want it to be exciting. I want it to be everything that you could ever imagine, which is what I want my kids to see in my life, so their faith is the exact same way. But not just my kids, everybody around me. And that's what God was saying to Israel. I want the world to look at you and go, I want that. I want what you have because it's so special to you. It's so incredible. The relationship is so exciting that I want to be a part of it. Maybe you do have a car that you treat really, really well. I'd love to ride in it. Is it fast? That'd be awesome. I want people to say the same thing about my faith. When they look at my faith, when they look at who I am, they see the way that I treat it, and they're like, I want to be a part of that. I want to ride in that. I want my kids to pick it up and run with it. And that's what God was saying here to the Israelites. Keep it new. Keep it fresh. Keep it exciting, because the world's going to look at you and want what you have. So we need to treat our faith like it was new every day, because every day is a new day. We must remember the things that God tells us, his blessings, his promises, his expectations, so we can over and over and over again make it new every single day. Because if we can do that, the world will look at us going, I want it. I want it. Why is it so special to you? Why do you live the way that you do? Why do you hold to what God has told you? Because that's what he asks for us so we can live an incredible life. And that's what he wanted for the Israelites. We're about to come to the end of this book. He gives them this warning because he knows what's coming. He says, I want you to pass down a Dodge Viper. I don't want you to give away a Beige Betty. So what did the Israelites do? What did they pass on? You have to come back next week and find out. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you. We thank you so much for who you are. God, that you are a God that loves us and cares for us and knows us so much, so well, that you've written in your word thousands of years ago exactly how we would behave today. And you give us warnings that we can remember the things that you have done. You give us opportunities to know how you've interacted with your people throughout the years so that we can know the same thing today, that we can take this and remember who you are, God. And that we can stay true to you and that we can keep our faith new every day. That we can experience you in a way that we never have before, and we can go back over and over and over again. Remember the things you have told us so it can be fresh and clean and new. And then I pray, Lord, that we pass that on to a world that's watching us, to a generation that's coming after us, that we will be people when they see the way we treat our relationship with you and the faith that we have, that they're like, I want that. Because God, you are so good. You are so powerful. You are so amazing. I pray we honor that every day. That as we know you more, the world around us knows you more because they know us. We thank you, Lord. We praise you. We give it all to you. In Jesus' name, amen.